Hello and welcome or welcome back to another episode of Shoulders Down. If you're new here, hello. I'm so glad that you found your way to this podcast. My name is Leah Kern. I'm a registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and on this podcast, I am your host and your guide, your fellow traveler along this journey to divest from diet culture and create a more peaceful, liberating, pleasurable relationship with food and your body. Today, I thought it would be fun to look back on 2025. As I'm recording this, it is Saturday, December 27th, and I thought it would be interesting to look back on 2025 and reflect on some of the bigger nutrition trends and themes that I observed. Now, a couple disclaimers. One is that I'm not on social media. Every once in a while, I pop on TikTok for fun, but I'm no longer on Instagram, which makes me feel like I don't have as good of a pulse on the trends. So forgive me if if there's like a more recent trend that I hasn't hit like YouTube and New York Times. And yeah, I would say like the way that my ideas of the trends is informed is by a few things. One, by the things that my clients are bringing to session. I start to see themes when my clients bring certain things up in session. So that's definitely one. Another is by the things that friends and family tell me. So I'll have friends be like, oh my God, I just keep seeing all these things about Pilates and how to have a Pilates body, and Pilates studios are popping up everywhere. So that is a piece of how I come to understand and reflect on these trends. And then another is media, even though I'm not on social media. Like I said, every once in a while I pop on TikTok. When I say I'm not on social media, I mean like I'm no longer creating for Instagram, which was something I did for several years. Sometimes I go on TikTok. I'm definitely someone who watches YouTube videos and, I read articles, the New York Times, different things online. I'm like, what do I read? Definitely the New York Times would be a big one. And then again, like odds and ends of articles that clients send or loved ones that know I'm in this space. Sometimes like journal articles or things that come from listservs that I'm on for eating disorder providers. And then also being in the world, observing menus at restaurants and marketing and the kind of ads that I see. So that is how I'm coming to this conversation. This is not like me researching like, what were the top nutrition trends this year? Again, this is mostly just anecdotal from clients, friends, family, media, articles, that kind of thing, and my own observations. So in this episode, we're going to talk about six health/nutrition trends that I saw become popular or increasingly popular in 2025, and then what I think about them as a registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor. What are my thoughts? Do they have any merit? Is it worth a trend that's worth digging deeper into and incorporating in your life, or is it something that I would recommend that you stay away from? So with that, we're going to dive right into the trends. I'll give you an overview of the six up top, and then we'll go through one by one with a little bit more detail. Six nutrition/health trends from 2025. One is protein obsession, the proteinification of everything. Two is GLP-1s and the normalization of thinness at all costs. Three is more monitoring, Oura Rings, glucose monitors, Apple Watch, these wearable devices. Four is walking pads and steps. Five is Pilates. And six is the app called Yuka. So we are going to start with protein obsession and the proteinification of everything. When thinking about the trends for 2025, this is the one that first came to me. Just before this, I was eating breakfast with my partner, Al, and he was like, oh, okay, you're recording a podcast episode. And I was telling him I'm going to go record a podcast episode. And he said, what's it about? And I said, the six health and nutrition trends that I noticed from 2025 and whether or not they're legit. And he asked what was one of the trends. And I said, the proteinification of everything and just like the ubiquity of protein in 2025. And he's like, oh, well, that seems like it's been a thing for longer. And I agree with him. I think protein obsession didn't start in 2025, but it feels like it reached new heights in 2025. Protein is everywhere, from protein popcorn to protein lattes. I feel like in 2025, it really hit the mainstream, and different food brands and influencers really helped to popularize the proteinification of everything. And when I say the proteinification, it's not a real word. What I mean is like adding protein to things where it isn't like maybe naturally occurring as much. So I'm thinking the Kardashian protein popcorn as like one main one that comes to mind. So before we get into what I think about this trend, which maybe you can tell by the tone of my voice already, I'll try to stay a little bit more unbiased before we unpack it. I think it's important to just lay out the groundwork of what is protein. Seems like such an obvious thing, but I think sometimes we can get so far away from the facts. So, quick definition, protein is a macronutrient made of amino acids that support so many different body functions. Protein is responsible for, all these different enzymes in the body, regulating metabolism. It's part of transporting nutrients and oxygen and the immune system and tissue repair. So protein essential for the body, absolutely. It's a macronutrient, which means it's one of the forms of energy that we need to consume to support our body. Now, protein is also a part of functional and satisfying meals. It helps to increase the staying power of meals, which means that it helps to create the feeling of satisfaction and also helps to keep you fuller for longer. So those are some objective facts about protein. Now, how much protein do we actually need? This is probably a bit more of a controversial question, but as a registered dietitian, what I can tell you is the standard RDA, like recommended daily allowance, which that's a whole other thing of like where do those numbers even come from and how much should we even pay attention to those numbers? But just for like a very loose ballpark, the standard recommended daily allowance is zero point 0.8 grams per kilograms of body weight. So you take your weight in pounds, which if you don't know it, that's okay. You don't have to figure this out. But to go from pounds to kilograms, in case you're not familiar, the conversion with from pounds to kilograms is taking your weight in pounds, dividing it by 2.2, and then you have your weight in kilograms. That number times zero point 0.8 is roughly the amount of protein, grams of protein you need in a day. But this isn't a rigid rule. It is not this number that is like set in stone and you absolutely need this much. The body is really complex. So if you yesterday ate a bunch more protein, then today you'd probably need less because your body's able to store and utilize nutrients over a period of time. We're not robots. It's not like, the slate gets wiped clean every night at midnight. There's like a line drawn in the sand and then everything resets. That's a problem with thinking about nutrition in these like daily allowances or calorie counting that you get an amount of calories per day or macro tracking or points and Weight Watchers. That's such a problem that I have with those ways of relating to food is that it completely ignores that our bodies have the ability to store and utilize nutrients over a period of time, and the what we eat doesn't just exist in this like isolated 24-hour window. Everything is connected. So yeah, if you ate a little less protein yesterday, your body might ask for more today. Or if you ate a little less protein 2 days ago, your body might ask for a little bit more today. Our bodies are really smart and they're able to store and utilize nutrients over a period of time that's longer than just like the 24-hour window. When it comes to how much protein we actually need, really our bodies will tell us if we're practicing intuitive eating. Our bodies will say, hey, I'm craving a steak or something with like a lot of beans and nuts and seeds if you're a vegetarian, or even like, I don't know, milk or like a smoothie or like a milkshake, something that's high in protein. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, like I started lifting weights. That means like I need to be eating more protein. And though it could be helpful to have that awareness that like when you're lifting weights, your body's growing muscle and muscle requires protein, though that's true, what you'll probably notice, depending where you are in your own intuitive eating journey, but the further along you get on your intuitive eating journey, you don't have to try and create this like outside pressure that tells you to eat more protein because your body will ask for more protein. It's pretty amazing. Like you might not usually be one who craves meat or I don't know, fish or something, but maybe on a day that you lift weights, you notice, oh, I'm really wanting a more protein heavy meal right now. So with that very basic overview of what is protein, roughly how much do we need, a few myths. One is that you need protein supplements to be healthy. So some people think like you must be having protein powders or some kind of protein supplement, and that's not true. You can absolutely meet your protein needs from food alone. Meat, eggs, beans, tofu, dairy, those types of things are typically enough for most people to meet their protein needs. That's not to say that protein supplements like protein powders are inherently bad, but I think the media can sometimes create this idea that like everyone should be having a scoop of protein powder in their ice cream or their cereal or their yogurt or their waffles, whatever, if they can. And that is a myth because you absolutely can meet your protein needs through food alone. And often the form of protein that we get in food is actually more bioavailable, which means our body has an easier time absorbing and digesting it. The second myth is that there's this like really particular window in which you must eat protein after a workout. The reality is that your total daily intake of protein matters more than the specific timing of it. So you don't need to be like rushing home from the gym to get your protein shake in. And there's this whole idea about the anabolic window. The idea that you must eat protein within 30 minutes after a workout has largely been debunked. Research shows that your total daily protein intake is far more important than the exact timing. So whether you eat a meal right after your workout or later in the day, your body can still use the protein effectively for recovery and strength. The other myth that we hear a lot with protein is, I think probably the most common myth, which is that vegans or vegetarians can't get enough protein from their diet. And they totally can. There are varied plant sources of protein, though they might be less bioavailable, which means it might be harder for your body to absorb those sources of protein. People who are vegan and vegetarian can get plenty of protein. Okay. So now we need to talk about the trend, which is the proteinification of foods or the idea of enriching foods with protein. So the proteinification is, as I said before, putting protein into things like chips and candy and lattes and popcorn and whatever. And what I think is so important is to unpack this idea that somehow diet culture has created this message that more protein is always better. If you could have the protein popcorn, why would you have the plain popcorn, the regular popcorn? If you could have the protein latte, why would you order the regular latte? This idea that it's inherently better, morally superior to have the protein, the higher protein product is something that I think is really kind of seeping into people's minds, especially this year. And that's not true. There's nothing inherently healthier about protein enriched products. Is it objectively true that these products have more protein? Yes, but that doesn't mean that they're better. Sometimes, actually, I would argue that it's worse because if you are craving regular popcorn and you feel guilty eating that, and you feel like, oh, it would be better if you had the protein popcorn because then at least it's like doing more for you. That is more problematic because what's happening there is a little bit of deprivation. You're not giving yourself the thing you're actually craving, which can lead to feeling deprived, and that can lead to increase the likelihood of binging later on. And it also leads to putting like regular foods on a pedestal and putting like the protein enriched foods in a category of like better or good foods, which labeling foods as good and bad isn't helpful. It promotes the diet mentality, which again leads to disordered eating, obsession, fixation, and increases the likelihood of binging. One other thing we need to talk about is this idea that what happens when you're eating a high protein diet? Does it damage your kidneys? So, this concern mainly comes from studies involving people with pre-existing kidney disease, and it shows that protein metabolism can place additional strain on kidney functions. However, for most people with healthy kidneys, the current research shows that even relatively high protein intakes do not harm kidney health. But Even if excess protein doesn't directly cause harm, it can still create unnecessary strain on the body since there's a limit to the amount of protein that the body can effectively use at once. So, at the end of the day, what's the bottom line here? What do I think about this trend? When it comes to protein-enriched products, are they worth it? Well, sometimes, for some people, protein-enriched foods like shakes and bars can be convenient if you are busy and you want something filling and something that'll keep you satisfied for a long time. Typically, protein can fill that need. But if you're already eating different kinds of foods, variety, and you're having an adequate amount of food, then these products won't add much benefit and may actually take away satisfaction because you probably don't authentically prefer the products over the original. If it's convenient and enjoyable, go for it. But if you find yourself frantically buying protein products out of fear that you need more protein, it could be worth taking a step back and reminding yourself that you can listen to your body. Your body can be trusted. If you need more protein, your body will probably ask for it. It's important to remember that sometimes you'll just want the normal popcorn or the normal latte, not the proteinified version, and that's perfectly okay. Diet trends can turn eating into this like utilitarian practice where everything is like optimized for nutrients and it's like almost like tech eating, like you're finding ways to try and like hack eating. But this ignores the fact that food is about pleasure and connection, and it doesn't have to be this like science experiment when we eat. At the end of the day, protein is, of course, valuable and necessary for the body, but it's not a magic ticket to perfect health or fitness. It's worth taking the current protein craze with a grain of salt. Like most things in diet culture, there is a kernel of truth, right? We need protein and it is helpful for satisfaction and staying power and blood sugar control and energy levels and all these things. But it has gotten way blown out of proportion and more isn't always more. While eating extra protein isn't usually physically harmful, it can become a slippery slope into sneaky diet mentality. And just like every other fad that cycles in and out of the wellness world, the proteinification of everything is probably not going to last very long. Oh, and one quick anecdote too. I had a friend who was like really into lifting and stuff, and she kind of fell down the protein rabbit hole. So when we say like though having excess protein might not like necessarily cause harm, it could lead to not having enough of other kinds of foods that your body needs. So my friend ended up getting hemorrhoids because she wasn't having enough fiber because so much of her food was coming from protein sources. And that was kind of crowding out the opportunity to have variety in different types of macronutrients. And she ended up not being able to eat enough fiber because she was so focused on protein. When you don't have enough fiber, it can impact your digestive tract, which can lead to, you know, not fun things down there. And hemorrhoids is one of them. Okay, the next trend that again did not start in 2025, but absolutely has continued to grow in popularity in 2025 is GLP-1s, and beyond that, like sort of the normalization of thinness at all costs. So GLP-1s didn't just exist in 2025, they really became normalized. It feels like when GLP-1s first came out, they were more of this thing that were for celebrities, and they were. It was expensive and harder to access. And in the past few years, we've seen them become more mainstream. But come 2025, it feels like everyone knows someone on one or multiple people on one. They're easier to acquire and they're just more mainstream. So even if GLP-1s didn't start in 2025, it feels like they really became normalized in 2025. I know for me personally, I know several people on them, and prior to this year, I maybe knew like one or two people on them. I also think about the ads on social media and elsewhere that are advertising ways of acquiring GLP-1s that like you don't even have to leave your house. I know there's this one company that I keep getting targeted ads for where you just like fill out an online thing and have a quick virtual visit with a doctor and then you could just get one sent to your house. So I think the accessibility is really at an all-time high, though they're of course still extremely inaccessible for many people in terms of like the financial piece and the lack of insurance coverage, or sometimes insurance covers them and then that coverage is taken away. So though they can be less accessible in that way, I think they're easier to get your hands on in terms of like for most medical providers are more familiar with the drug and prescribing it, more people are asking about it. There's advertisements for them. So they have reached definitely a new level of being normalized this year. And I think this normalization could also look like, just sort of like casual conversation amongst people of like, oh yeah, I'm on one of those, or like, yeah, my doctor recommended that. Also, there's like bodies shrinking quickly all around us. So, influencers that used to be in larger bodies and share publicly about that have lost large amounts of weight. And sometimes they disclose that it's from a GLP-1, sometimes not. I think there's also very little talk of the side effects in these cases. So when I talk about GLP-1s and the normalization of thinness at all costs, what I'm talking about is there's thinness being portrayed and celebrated again after a short period, which felt like moving more towards this like quote unquote body positivity movement. And I think now it's being praised again at all costs. And this isn't like always, of course, there are circles of people that aren't doing this, but the cost being like the side effects and the mental impacts and the financial impacts and the weight cycling and the, you know, GI issues and all this. I think from what I've seen, there's a lot of people getting smaller, but not a lot of talk about what else comes with that. And maybe for some people, there really are the side effects are minor, but I think for a lot of people, they're significant, but not the thing that's being centered. It's the weight loss and the thinness that's being centered, and the side effects can kind of get swept under the rug. That's where the like at all cost piece comes in for me. And I also think there's this quiet return of compliments tied to weight loss. The idea that yeah, I think we had this moment where people knew, okay, you shouldn't compliment someone on their weight. Losing weight isn't always a good thing. In fact, often it could be linked to anxiety or depression or cancer or other illness that can cause a bunch of weight loss or an eating disorder. So complementing weight loss can be complementing disordered behaviors. It could be complementing something that's actually tied to a mental health issue or a deeper sickness. And so I think there was a moment where people were starting to understand that. But I feel like now there's this return of like, oh my God, you look so good. Wow. Oh my God, I can't believe how much weight you lost. It just feels like those compliments are coming back now. I don't know. Again, all of this is like just, as I said, big disclaimer. These are I'm painting with a wide stroke brush here of just things that I've seen and speaking slightly from my own perspective, which goes without saying, this is my podcast. What we need to talk about when it comes to the GLP-1s and the normalization of thinness at all costs. Again, like it's impossible to fully get into this in just this like one aspect of the episode. I've done a couple other episodes on GLP-1s at this point. But GLP-1s are still restriction. It's just rebranded. The medication caused folks to eat less. I think what changed this year is like we stopped calling that restriction. And when it comes to GLP-1s, like we were like, oh no, but it's just a medication. Like it's a treatment. I think this is interesting how we stopped calling it restriction and we started calling it a treatment. That feels like a very much a recent thing, a 2025 thing. And this harms all kinds of people, but especially people with eating disorders who are trying to move away from restriction. And now restriction is being prescribed because ultimately GLP-1s impact appetite, lead people to eat less, and restricts their food intake. And that leads to weight loss. And I think that people who are already marginalized and already feel on the outskirts of society in whatever way that is, are feeling additional pressure because it seems like thinness is so within reach now. So the pressure to choose thinness, I think, is like especially loud because it's like being dangled right above us in all different ways. And there's also this piece of like, oh, well, if you don't just take this medication, then that's irresponsible. Like, why wouldn't you just do the thing that's gonna make you thin? So, yeah, it harms marginalized people, people with eating disorder histories. Those are the two main populations that I think about. Of course, I think it's just harmful for society as a whole that we're taking this step backwards towards valuing thinness above physical health, mental health, and this major step backwards in this idea that diet culture wants us to believe that weight is an indicator of health when it's not. Because one of the big things people will say is, oh, I just feel healthier now. And that's so valid. And I'm not here to invalidate people's experiences. Because, yeah, I can imagine you really would physically feel better, especially when losing weight can lead to less weight-based depression and feel like more acceptance on a societal level. But the idea that it's just objectively better for your health is not true. We know that weight is not an indicator of health. The Health at Every Size framework helps us understand this. And I have an episode, if you really want to dive deep on this, called Five Reasons Why Your Weight Doesn't Determine Your Health. I'll link it in the show notes. But what it seems like happened in 2025 is that the GLP-1 industry tried to like put the cat back in the bag of like, no, 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 like you really should lose weight for your health. Because they feel like before 2025, people were starting to understand that your weight is not an indicator of your health, but it's such a main aspect in the marketing for the GLP-1 companies and the greater diet industry to try and get us to believe that this is not just some vain thing, like this is for your health. I think it's easier for people to justify, oh no, I'm doing this for my health, than it is to admit to themselves that, no, I really just want to lose weight for aesthetics. Which, by the way, I'm not judging you. If you're listening to this and you're on one or you've thought about being on one, I truly want to emphasize, I can't only imagine the pressures that you have felt that have led you to the decision of going on one or to thinking about going on one. It's compelling. It's really compelling. It's everywhere. And seeing people lose a ton of weight and feeling like, well, why wouldn't I just do that? Maybe that would make me feel better. Maybe that would give me more confidence. Maybe that would help my health. Yeah, it's extremely compelling. And I'm not here to judge you. You have body autonomy. You can choose to go on a GLP-1 if that feels like the right decision for you. And I'm talking about this through the lens of it being a trend because like so many other things that we see come in and out of the diet world, it is a trend. And I don't think that it's gonna be soaring at this level of popularity forever. I think that as more research comes out, as people are on these drugs longer and experiencing the side effects, I think that as we start to see that when people go off them, they do regain the weight and people realize they don't want to be on them forever or financially can't be on them forever or physically can't be on them forever because of the side effects. I think that people will start thinking about what does it mean to go on one if I will gain the weight back when I go off of it. So I do think this is a trend. I think that it's a huge trend and it's one that is maybe staying in the trend cycle a little longer because there's so much marketing power behind it and so much money behind it. But it is a trend and it's a trend that has become very popular in 2025. So the bottom line, GLP-1s may genuinely help some people. Again, I'm not here uh to wag my finger at you or tell you like, what are you doing? How have you done this? I think that they can genuinely help some people, especially folks with diabetes, which was their original intended use. And people deserve body autonomy. And a culture that normalizes appetite suppression as a morally virtuous thing is dangerous. And that's what we've seen happen in 2025. And it worries me. So when it comes to like, does this trend have merit? What do I think about it? What I think about it is it's concerning for uh, folks who are at risk and folks who have a history of an eating disorder or disordered eating, especially. I think that community can be really vulnerable and, just want to try the things that are being marketed as magic fixes, and I don't blame you. Like I said, it's extremely, extremely compelling. Marketing is a powerful thing. They really know what they're doing. They know how to get inside our brains and kind of hit us push our buttons and activate the weak points or our vulnerable points. And so if it's getting to you, if you're thinking, oh my God, maybe I will just try this. Everyone around me seems to be doing it. You're so not alone. You're really not alone. As a registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor, my take on this trend of GLP-1s increasing in popularity and the normalization of thinness at all costs, it concerns me, as I've said. And I want folks to have informed consent. I want folks to know what they're really signing up for when they start a GLP-1. And I want folks to know that they can opt out of this trend even if there aren't people in your everyday life or your main community that are on the anti-diet intuitive eating path, there are people on this path, and there are people who are still choosing to feed themselves even when everyone else around them is shrinking, and people who are still choosing to rage against the diet culture, the wellness culture, the capitalist patriarchal culture that wants to keep women hungry and tired and that wants to keep us preoccupied with food so we don't have time to focus on other important things. There are people out there who are doing this work and who are actively every day trying to resist, trying to make peace with their body, trying to feed themselves. And you can be a part of that, even though this trend feels so ubiquitous. There are people out there that are still pushing back. And this podcast is proof. And the people who tune in and listen, and the people in my newsletter community and the clients I'm seeing, there are people who this doesn't feel right and they want to resist. So know that you don't have to opt into this trend. The third trend that I'm seeing, again, didn't start in 2025, certainly increasing in popularity in 2025, is increase in body monitoring through like tech products like Oura Rings and glucose monitors and Apple Watches. Glucose monitors and Oura Rings, particularly, probably mostly glucose monitors feels like a very 2025 thing where I'm seeing, more people, I'm just noticing more people wearing them. And are some percentage of those people folks who actually have diabetes and have like the genuine need to monitor their glucose? Probably. But my guess would be, especially the area I live in the Bay Area, very like wellness uh, centered and people who tend to be concerned with their wellness and trying to like optimize health feels very San Francisco Bay Area. I'm guessing that a good percentage of the people I see wearing glucose monitors are doing it more from like a biohacking, health optimizing standpoint versus a genuine need to monitor their glucose as a person with diabetes. So yeah, I think that there's different forms of this. Like I said, the glucose monitors, the Oura Rings seem like mostly I see women wearing them. And then Apple Watches, they monitor things like steps and heart rate and calories and all those things and sleep. So what do I think about this? Well, I think that like all these trends, there's a kernel of something useful. Like, if we think about protein, yeah, we need protein. If you think about GLP-1s, yeah, there's a kernel of something useful. They were created, they're a medical miracle for people who need them, for people with diabetes. And I'd even leave space for maybe for some folks in other situations, they can be life-changing. When it comes to Oura Rings and glucose monitors and Apple Watches and these types of like Fitbit devices, the kernel of truth to me feels like, yeah, it can be useful to see for some people, how'd you sleep? How many steps are you getting? I don't know, what's your body temperature? Those kind of things. They can be interesting and useful. However, like so many things, I think they get blown out of proportion and people become obsessed and overly fixated, and it disconnects us from ourselves. Now, here's a story. I was talking to a client, and this was like probably a year ago or something, and I I asked her like somehow we were talking about sleep, and she said, "Well, I slept really bad last night." And I said, "How do you know?" Which might be a weird question, but that's something I'm often asking clients because I want them to think about how it feels. How do they know? Like, are they feeling dehydrated? Are their eyes feeling droopy? Are they feeling like heaviness in their legs? Like, how does tiredness manifest in their body? Which is part of interoceptive awareness, this idea of having the ability to connect to our internal body experiences, which is a key part of intuitive eating. So anyway, this client, I was asking her and she was like, "Oh, well, my Apple Watch said I slept bad." And I said, "Well, do you feel like tired? Do you feel like you slept bad?" And it was very hard for her to pull apart what she was told and what her actual lived experience was. So my concern with this is that it leads us to outsource our decisions about our body and our experiences about how we feel in our body to a piece of technology instead of going inwards and feeling it out and deciding for ourselves. So, like with the steps, I think that there's something good there, right? Like it can be helpful to get more movement if you're a person who enjoys walking, sure, right? Can help with like blood flow and mental health, and it can help with digestion, all different things. Great. Movement can be great. But what worries me is like people who it can lead us to start being like, okay, I need to move my body a lot today. And it's like, well, do you? Or I don't know. What if you had a really active day yesterday and today you don't need to hit 10,000 steps or close your rings and you're feeling more like you want to rest? But what if you feel guilty because you're on a streak and you want to close your rings every day or whatever? I worry that it interferes with our actual experiences in our body and the cues of what our body is telling us. And I don't think this is a problem for all people, but for the people that I work with who come from a history of outsourcing their eating decisions, whether that was to a calorie tracking app or a point system or a set of rules or a time on the clock, I worry that these tracking devices can end up being just another source of outsourcing decisions and lead us to be further disconnected from our bodies. Now, I think there is a point in a person's intuitive eating journey where they are recovered enough from that disordered diet mentality, from that constant outsourcing of eating decisions and exercise decisions. I think there comes a point where you can have something like an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch and have a neutral, balanced relationship with it. But I think that in the beginning, it can often be disruptive. Eventually, there can come a point, like for me, I've been an intuitive eater for 11 years. Sometimes I look at the amount of steps. I don't have any of those devices. I just have on my phone, like the health app. And sometimes I'm curious, oh, how many steps did I get today? But it's really neutral. It's just like, oh, okay, there's that number. And there's not a story or anything really further attached to it. And yeah, I think years ago I wouldn't have had that ability. I probably would have gotten more wrapped up in it and tried to like run around in place to hit 10,000 steps before bed or something like that. But because I'm further enough out from that experience of constantly outsourcing my eating decisions when I was in the diet mentality, I think that I'm able to see it more objectively. Now, the glucose monitors, I don't know that there's ever really a great use for them, even when you're years into your intuitive eating journey and further away from diet thinking. I think that there's a case to be made for like, oh, it's interesting to see my blood sugar levels. Sure, but again, it's like there's other ways of knowing. Like if you get really hungry after you just ate, it's probably the case that your blood sugar rose and then like fell really quickly. Maybe that's because your meal didn't have enough protein, fat, or fiber. Other ways it could be like if your energy level kind of, crashes right after you eat, that could be another sign that your blood sugar was more of like a quick spike instead of like a stable release. I don't know. I worry people put too much emphasis on the foods and like forget that there's other things that impact blood sugar, like stress and sleep and genetics and hormones. So I don't know, maybe someone out there is using a glucose monitor who doesn't have diabetes and they're using it in a way that's like healthy and not disordered. But I just think like I think we have too much information and I kind of just think it's unnecessary. I think that it's worth going inwards and sensing like, how do I feel after a meal? If you feel fine and energized, great. If not, okay, we'll see what we can add and see is there a way we can try and maybe stabilize your blood sugar to keep you fuller longer. We can experiment with that without having to like see those numbers. I don't know. I just don't like this like these companies trying to like get in our heads of like getting us to like track everything. It just kind of creeps me out and makes it feel like they're trying to turn us into like robots. And I don't know. I think it takes away from our connection with ourselves. And I think it's usually unnecessary. All of that being said, if you enjoy seeing your steps or your sleep score or whatever, great. My advice would be to take it with a grain of salt and to notice if it's starting to get in the way of your own connection with your body. Are you starting to value your fitness tracker or these tr devices more than your own actual lived experience in your body? If your Apple Watch says you slept bad, and you feel well rested, that can start to get confusing because do you think, well, the Apple Watch must be right, right? Like, and it can also become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you see that it says you slept bad, then you might be convincing yourself all day, I'm tired, I slept bad. Whereas if you never saw that, you might just be like, all right, like moving on with the day. So these are the kinds of things to look out for. Are you valuing the stats on your tracker more than your own experience in your body? That is an important question to ask and an important thing to continue checking in with. Okay, this one, number four, I don't have a whole lot to say, but I feel like steps and like walking pads and 10,000 steps just continues to be a trend. And I think there's something good in there. It's helpful to get moving more. We kind of need more reminders to get moving because our lives are inherently not as like active as they once were. We don't need to move as much to like do daily tasks unless you live in a city or, commute by foot or something. But for most people, we don't have to. And there are real benefits of moving more, walking more for mental health and physical health. So I think there is a kernel of goodness here. But again, the tendency is, I think, for so many people, especially coming from the disordered eating background, is like more is more is more is more. Like, let me get 10,000, let me get more, let me get a streak of, X amount of days with all these steps. Let me walk on my walking pad all day. And the walking pad thing specifically, I would say that's probably more of like the piece that's unique to 2025. I think that, yeah, there's something good about it. Great. A lot of people have desk jobs. It's a cool way to get some movement in while you're at your desk. But what kind of bums me out about it is I think so much of what can be helpful about walking is like taking a break, getting away from your desk, maybe getting fresh air, and the walking pad is just kind of like it takes away some of those other pieces that typically come with the walk, like the fresh air, the getting outside, the getting away from your desk, getting out into the world, maybe seeing a neighbor and saying hi and smiling, and petting a cute dog that you see on the street. I don't know, smelling the flowers, seeing the sights, and instead it's just like, okay, we're doing the walking piece, but we've sort of stripped it of some of the other aspects, which might be part of the aspects that contribute to better mental health, to better physical health, the fresh air, the sunshine, the social interaction, the break from, your desk. So that's my one qualm with the walking pad. And I get that, like, for some people, it's like, this is as good as it's going to be, right? Maybe you don't have a safe environment to walk in. Maybe the weather is not great. Maybe it's just all you genuinely have time for with the demands of your job. All of that makes sense to me, and I can see how like a walking pad would help those things. And at the same time, I worry that it's like another thing that's like turning us into robots or a machine. Like that's such a theme, like with the protein popcorn and like the all the self-monitoring. I just think, oh, we're so much more complex than that. And I don't want these parts of being human to be stripped from us. I want us to still go outside and take a walk and see who we see or the smells and sights that we encounter. So that's my fear with the walking pad. But overall, yeah, if you enjoy getting steps in, if that's a way of movement that is fun for you and you enjoy your walking pad, great. I would encourage you to consider, are you getting fixated on numbers? Do you find yourself having trouble allowing yourself to not get a certain amount of steps? Those are signs that it could be getting to the point of being disordered. All right, we got two more here. Number five is Pilates. Pilates feels like it was everywhere in 2025. And this one I did do a little research on. Pilates classes are being like fully booked. Pilates studios are popping up everywhere. And it's a form of exercise. Like I remember when I was young, my mom would do Pilates. I think she did mat Pilates or reformer, I'm not sure, but I remember like going to the little daycare at the gym while she took Pilates classes. And I just remember that because it's a funny word. And I remember as a kid, I was like, huh, Pilates, interesting. But it's coming back in a huge way. And I feel like Pilates coming back might be connected to or related to the idea of thinness being back in, because Pilates has this vibe of like it's a way to get toned without getting quote unquote big, and it's very much like targeted towards women. And there are benefits, right? It's great for mobility and core strength and balance and longevity. It has amazing um, side effects or amazing results like associated with incorporating that type of movement. And at the same time, I think like the sort of current iteration of it is interesting. It feels a little bit like elitist. When I think of Pilates, I think of expensive classes, sort of this like matching Lululemon set or one of these like trendy workout brands. I think of a very specific and narrow type of person, usually like a white woman, honestly, is what I think of because I think that's so much of the marketing. Someone who's toned but not too big, and so, again, while I think this trend is great in terms of like, there's lots of positive benefits of Pilates. If you enjoy it, great, do Pilates. But know that you don't have to do Pilates. You don't have to do this just because it's like the current trend. If you don't enjoy it, that's okay. You don't have to do it. If you have no interest, that's fine. You don't have to do it. And I would encourage you to think critically about the ways that it's marketed. It's sort of maybe some of the subtle promises that seem to come with Pilates. If you do this exercise, you will look thin. You will look like this girl on Instagram who talks about Pilates. You will have this like aspirational sort of wellness look or personality. And that's where I have a problem with, because no, so much of how people look like, the way that they might look in a Pilates advertisement is genetics, is social determinants of health, is not because they did Pilates to look like that. So that's where I'm always going to be critical. But overall, in terms of this trend, sure, if you like Pilates, cool. It could be an interesting new way to move your body and something to try. I'm thinking of like clothing trends. Like if there's like a clothing trend and you're like, oh, that's interesting. I kind of feel some energy around that. Maybe I'll try that, incorporate that into my wardrobe. But if you don't, then leave it. So I think that that's the kind of thing I want to leave you with Pilates is, yeah, if it piques your interest, maybe you want to try it, but don't feel this pressure that like you have to do it because you want to look like the way those girls look. It's just that's not the reason they look like that. Okay. Number six is something that came up in a call the other day with a on a discovery call with someone who wanted to sign up to work together. And this is the app called Yuka or Yucca. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Again, it's been a thing for longer than 2025, but I have certainly heard more and more about it in 2025. It's a popular app and it allows consumers to basically scan products, cosmetic products, foods, cleaning products, and it provides an instant score, I believe, between 0 and 100, and basically rating from excellent to bad. And this is based on things like the nutritional value or the additives and chemicals, whether or not it's organic, these types of things. So it offers pretty detailed ingredient information, and then sometimes it'll suggest a quote unquote healthier alternative, aiming to try and get the users to make quote unquote better choices. This app, I think, is so well intentioned. I think it's really trying to help people be like more conscious of the products they use on their body and their skin and the things they eat. But unfortunately, I think that the outcome is that the kinds of people who end up downloading this app are people who are health conscious. And then what can happen is it can lead them down a rabbit hole of over obsession and something like orthorexia, which is unhealthy obsession with health. And what I don't like about it is that it moralizes food very concretely. It scores food as good or bad, which can lead to feeling guilt and fear, or it can create rigidity. I also think that the app lacks nuance. It doesn't account for other things. So, for example, like say there's a product and it's like, this product, this like, I don't know, Coca-Cola. It- It's very hard to fully place any negative health outcomes from Coca-Cola on the Coca-Cola itself. So this is the example I gave the client I had a discovery call with the other day. You know, if they were doing a study to test the impacts of something like sugar sweetened beverages or whatever, they can't keep people in a lab and only change one thing and have that one variable be whether or not they're drinking sugar sweetened beverages. So there are so many factors, which makes it really hard to get to create a causal relationship with any one product or food. If you think about it, it's like the people who are probably, if they're doing like an epidemiological study looking at like a population of people who drink more sugar sweetened beverages, those folks probably also have other factors that could be accounting for negative health outcomes, like higher stress levels, maybe lower socioeconomic status, maybe living in food deserts, maybe worse access to healthcare, worse quality healthcare, maybe lower education, which could impact health outcomes. All of these different social determinants of health could lead to could could be explanations for the different health outcomes, not the sugar sweetened beverage in and of itself. So I feel like this app Yucca, it looks at just the food and can lead us to be so zoomed in on just food and forget that food is just one piece of the puzzle in terms of what impacts our health outcomes. And I feel like it's like we're too in the weeds when we start using an app like this, and we forget that the irony of like being so stressed that you're standing in the grocery store or in CVS scanning every single beauty product to look at Yucca before, and the extra time and energy and stress that takes. Stress is bad for your health, right? Like the if as a parent, if you're so freaked out about everything you're feeding your kid, that's not good for your child either. They can feel that energy. They can feel you moralizing food as good or bad. So my fear with the app Yucca is like the kinds of people who even have the time and energy to download it and to be scanning things and thinking about this are probably folks of higher socioeconomic status and probably folks that like truly don't really need to be worrying about these things because the things that impact health, like having a safe living environment, clean drinking water, adequate access to food, these types of things, socioeconomic status, and access to quality healthcare, all of those things that have a greater impact on health than the foods we're eating or the products we're using. I just worry like it's leading to potential disordered eating or orthorexia or can spiral into an unhealthy obsession. Now, are there people out there that can look at these two things and say, okay, like here's this product versus this product. This one seems to have worse chemicals, whatever the yucca standards are for that. And are there people that can do that without spiraling? Certainly. I'm coming from the background of people who have a history of disordered eating or diet mentality. I do not recommend this. I think this is a very slippery slope. And I think we get too in the weeds with specific things about food, and it leads us to lose the plot, the big picture of what else actually impacts our health outcomes. Again, for the people listening to this podcast, I would not recommend this app. I think it lacks nuance. It doesn't account for context and other social determinants. I think it can lead to fear mongering, and I think it can create this like good bad dichotomy, play into rigidity and guilt, and definitely increase someone's risk of developing something like orthorexia, which is an unhealthy obsession with health. Okay, so there we have it. Those are our six trends. To give them back to you really quick here. We got the protein obsession, proteinification of everything, the TLDR on that, which is basically the bottom line is it's unnecessary. It is blowing the importance of protein out of proportion. More isn't more. But if you like these protein products, you genuinely enjoy them, they don't lead you to feel deprived, go for it. Just know that when you're eating it, it's not healthier or morally superior to the regular version. The next is GLP-1s and the normalization of thinness at all costs. This is a heartbreaking trend, and I don't know really what else to say other than it makes me really sad that this is where we are culturally. And at the same time, I do want to hold space for the fact that you have body autonomy. If you feel the pressure to go on a GLP-1, you're not alone. And there are people out there who are resisting this pressure, who are still choosing to feed themselves and work on accepting their authentic body as they are, even when everyone around them is, or it feels like everyone around them is choosing to engage in intentional weight loss. Then we have the body monitoring from things like Oura Rings, glucose monitors, and Apple Watches. The TLDR in this one is it can lead us to be disconnected from our bodies if it's something that you feel like you can engage with from a place of objective curiosity and, kind of like gamifying things and it's fun for you, that's great. Just look out for, is this getting in the way of me trusting my body, hearing my body's cues, and am I valuing these body monitoring devices and stats more than my own intuition? Then we have the walking pad trend, which kernel of goodness, right? It's great to engage in walking if it feels good for you, if you enjoy it. However, we want to be careful that we're not like turning ourselves into robots and machines that have to get a certain amount of steps and that it's not turning into a rigid thing. And also with the walking pad specifically, we want to think about why walking might be beneficial and how walking pads might be taking some of those aspects away from us. Then Pilates, yeah, Pilates, basically, like so many of these other trends, kernel of goodness. It's a form of movement that can help with balance and longevity and building muscle, and all of those things are great. However, it's not the only form of exercise. You absolutely don't have to engage in it if you don't want to. And I would encourage us to think about some of the read between the lines messaging that comes with Pilates, some of the elitist vibes, some of the um, glorification of thinness and therefore, anti-fatness threads that can be baked into the marketing of Pilates. And then lastly is the app Yucca. Basically, I don't really recommend this if you are someone coming from a history of disordered eating or any kind of complicated relationship with food and body. I think it can really quickly lead to spiraling down the moralization of foods and products and can lead to unnecessary stress and overall lead us to lose the plot, to kind of get too in the weeds with these decisions that in the grand scheme don't matter as much as social determinants of health, genetics, other things that have a greater impact. And if you like the app and you don't feel like it's making you squirrely, cool, go for it. Use the app. Okay, those are our six trends. I gotta go to a friend's birthday party because I've been yapping for longer. I told myself I'm just gonna do it. I'm not gonna get too in depth on each item, but here I am. I think I always go in more in depth than I plan, but that's okay. That is all I have for you for today. Those are the six nutrition and health trends that I'm reflecting on from 2025. If I missed some, I'm sure I did. As I said, not being on social media, I feel like I'm like out of the loop a little bit. I'd love to hear from you. What do you think about these trends? What trends did I miss? Email me at leah@leahkernrd.com. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this episode. That is all for this week, and I will chat with you next week in our next episode.